Hi. Why are there so many self-diagnosed autistic people about these days? Where do they all come from? How do they do it? And why do they want to do it? I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic myself. Today on Autistic, we're asking, why do some autistic people self-diagnose? Last time, in the first in this series, we discussed why so many autistic people didn't get spotted when they were children and instead learned about their autism in adulthood. Lots of the folks who commented on that video are currently in that category most commonly known as self-diagnosed, or were until recently. But that phrase, self-diagnose, self-diagnosis, is a little misleading, in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with the words on the surface of it, far from it. The Oxford definition of diagnosis is the identification of the nature of an illness or other problem by examination of the symptoms. The problem is not its literal meaning. It's the cultural baggage that goes with it, the connotations and implications beyond the dictionary definition. The term self-diagnosed wasn't originally coined by people who've actually decided they're autistic. It was an infantile jibe that started being circulated before self-diagnosis was even possible. Back in the mid-1990s, when both the autism spectrum and the internet were brand new in people's minds, a small number of disaffected individuals with freshly minted Asperger's syndrome diagnoses and chips on their shoulders cranked up their dial-up modems to gather on bulletin boards and early chat rooms with the rest of us autistic early adopters. There they dreamed of the coming time when their brilliance and superiority would be recognised, and they would step out from the shadows, celebrated as the next step in human evolution.
I'm not just like the rest of you. I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better. I am better.
It was they who first started sniggering about the inevitable day when ordinary folks, normies as they called them disparagingly, would self-diagnose to falsely emulate their shining example of humanity's potential. Their derision relied on the commonly held misnomer that only a third party can deliver a diagnosis, thereby making self-diagnosis at the very least lesser, if not invalid altogether. It's an insult hiding behind benign language. A dog whistle. I've no desire to insult any of my viewers, even indirectly, so I prefer to talk about self-identification instead. Same meaning, less baggage. When those unpleasant individuals back in the 90s were busy scrying the great autistic reckoning, others in the community saw the potential in these new internet tools to do something constructive. Fast forward 30 years or so, and you find people like me making content online in the hope of helping other autists avoid some of the pitfalls we fell into, and to maybe feel a bit more seen in a world which consistently pushes us to the sidelines. We're not just reaching out to other autistic folks, though. We're hoping that some non-autistic people might find our work and learn from it too, and we often put a lot of effort into making that happen. It's autistic outreach, if you like. We're hoping that by presenting our world in a way that non-autistic people find relatable, we can help build bridges and maybe make some other unknown autist's life a little more comfortable, because their mum, their teacher, their boss, spouse, or whoever learned something that boosted their understanding or communication. So we don't, as a rule, make turgid lists of symptoms and tragedy, alternating between resentment and feeling sorry for ourselves. We try to make engaging, uplifting, or empowering content about specifics. Whether we're writing a blog, a poem, a video, or a ballet about autism, we're just as keen for people to see what we make as any other creator. But it's the message that counts. The message to both other autists who may be feeling confused, lost and alone, and to non-autistic folks who come across our work, is that being autistic is a huge part of who we are, but we don't want it to come between us all. People don't usually see themselves in clinical descriptions of autism because they're not really worded in a way that feels relatable on a personal level. They're checklists of unpleasant attributes and fundamental fallibilities most people would have a difficult time seeing in themselves. But sometimes non-autistic folks watch a video, listen to a podcast, or read an article made by an autistic creator, and unexpectedly, they see themselves. That's where self-identification starts for some folks, but it never ends there. Very few people come away from that moment calling themselves autistic. Ever since I started this channel, I've received comments and emails from people who've experienced their revelatory spark whilst watching something I made, but very few of them tell anyone else at that point. I'm saying they rather than we this time round, because I didn't walk this road. Those of us who were diagnosed in the early days, us 20th century autists, travelled an entirely separate but parallel road of our own. I've chatted with hundreds of folks at different stages of their journey over the years, especially in the 6 years since starting Autistic. For most people, it takes a long time and a lot more research for that initial spark of recognition to grow into a big enough flame for them to share it with anyone else. It's not an easy topic to bring into a conversation, especially with someone who might already see autism negatively. You see, autism content isn't something people often stumble across accidentally. I wish it was. So the old, I was looking up tractors and autism stuff came up instead routine isn't as convincing as it might be. You'll be asked why you were looking for autism stuff in the first place, and it's not always a question people want to answer until they're sure about themselves. I can't speak for every platform, but I know YouTube pretty well, and it doesn't show you autism videos at random. You have to go looking for it or something closely connected to it first. If you find autism videos popping up in your feed, it's a safe bet that you already showed an interest in autism or neurodiversity one way or another, and not necessarily on YouTube itself. What started you looking? For many of my viewers who self-identified, it was a professional that pointed them in this direction. A lot of people started down this journey because of an observation made by someone who should know in their professional capacity. It might have been a lightweight, offhand remark easily dismissed as jest, or a sincere and heartfelt suggestion that someone really should consider the possibility. But a seed is planted either way. Quite often it'll get pushed to the back of their minds, sometimes forcibly so. For everyone who's curious to dig deeper, there's a couple more who'd rather bury the idea for the time being whilst they get on with more pressing concerns. But eventually, they type autism into a search engine enough times that they stop being fed only the top links, the ones paid for by the medical insurers and the lobbyists, the newspaper headlines and the celebrity stories. They start finding content made by ordinary autistic folks, like this. And it scares them sometimes. Scares them to their very bones when they realise that this time, they're not just seeing other people in there. They're seeing themselves. And for a lot of people, it's very unwelcome. But whether they continue from that point or they reject what they found for the time being, most of them end up back here again, as all the other possibilities gradually eliminate themselves and the realisation starts in earnest. How long the process takes between the inkling of a possibility of a maybe to openly discussing it with a partner or a friend is down to the individual and what resources they find first. But the figure of a year comes up quite often, rarely less than that. I meet plenty of people when they get to the stage of being happy to state they're autistic to accepting autists like myself, but they're not ready to tell anyone close to them yet. Quite a few would like to actually get their diagnosis sorted and in the bag before they tell anyone, even their spouses. So, that covers folks who were tipped the wink by someone professional. What about those who got here under their own steam, without professional guidance? They come in two main varieties. The first isn't too dissimilar to the folks we just talked about because their interest was prompted by a third party, but indirectly. For these people, their curiosity was prompted by compassion. They are usually folks who have close ties to people who already have autism diagnoses. Because autism traits are hereditary, that's often a family member, though it can as easily be a friend, colleague, or someone's boss who wants to learn more about how autistic people tick so they can help out. Be a better friend, colleague, sibling, or whatever their relationship is. But when they start looking, they start to wonder if they've taken a wrong turn, because they find aspects of themselves described. The deeper they go, the richer the familiarity, until they get to thinking, maybe I'm autistic too. There's one more distinct category that's both the most recent one to emerge and the most unfairly represented. These are the folks that didn't have any connection to autism or autistic people before, but found their way here nonetheless. Feeling like you're barely coping with life is hardly a novelty in the 21st century, any more than it was in the 20th. But we have a lot more information available to us, and it's so easy to find most of it. For autism self-identification to even be possible at this time, a whole bunch of different factors had to come together, which I talked about in the last video in this series. But the most important one of those contributors didn't really come together until about 15 years ago. Critics, naysayers, and concerned members of the public like to point the finger at TikTok as the prime suspect these days, but the truth is, all social media is to blame if blame is what you want to dish out. I'd say maybe thanks is in order, but then I freely admit to my bias. Why thanks? What bias? Is this the proof the autism police have been looking for about recruitment? Have I been caught red-handed admitting that we're trying to turn the kids autistic? Yeah, whatever. I may not be a particularly sociable chap, but that doesn't mean I don't like people or that I lack compassion. I'm thankful when people feel happier about themselves, when they feel more in control of their own lives and more certain of where they fit into the bigger picture. If I can contribute to their well-being in some small way, I'm not ashamed of it. I meet plenty of folks who weren't prompted to look into autism because somebody gave them the nudge or because they were trying to help someone else, but nonetheless ended up in the same place making the same connections. They didn't come here with any intent. They didn't come in search of a label or an excuse. They weren't trying to be edgy or looking for a quirk they could adopt like a fashion accessory. They didn't really know what autism truly was until they found us. But when they started to see themselves in there, they didn't choose to look away. They stayed to learn more and surprise themselves. They originally went searching for answers to why they'd always felt unhappy, why they'd never quite connected with certain people, or why bad things seemed to keep happening despite them following all the rules. Like I said before, creators like me, we don't just push out dry, repetitive clinical material. We try to entertain and build community as well as inform. We make videos about things that impact on autistic life and neurotypical life. So when people look into those subjects, they sometimes find us. Research into anxiety, Hyperlexia, alexithymia, aphantasia, ableism, sensory differences, or even Star Trek might bring them to this channel alone, along with dozens of other topics. They are often just as reluctant to jump on board the autism train as some of those others who took a hint from their counsellor or their kid's teacher, and they go down the same road of learning more and gradually accepting that "I've been autistic all along" might be the answer they've been looking for. But it still usually takes them a year or so, just as I mentioned earlier, to go from the point of thinking "I might be autistic" to actually telling even their partner or closest friends what they suspect, let alone declaring they're autistic to the world at large. In recent years, I've got to know a number of people via their autistic alter egos on social media, long before I knew their real names. Usually, but not exclusively, undiagnosed autistic folks who need to share, to talk openly about their lives, but fear very real, damaging consequences if they should be exposed. Setting up a separate profile with the sole purpose of talking to others like them is the only safe way some people can engage without losing everything they hold dear. Contrary to some very loud opinions online, usually expressed all in capitals, an autism diagnosis doesn't bring any advantages with it. It takes away a few disadvantages of not having a diagnosis if you are genuinely autistic. But there is absolutely nothing about that diagnosis that gives any of us a social or material leg up in today's world. There's no shortcut to success, no get-out-of-jail-free card, nor higher perch on the social pecking order that becomes accessible with an autism diagnosis. And anyone who thinks it'll open the door to a life of luxury on state disability benefits is in for a very rude awakening if they should ever try it for themselves. In truth, life after diagnosis can raise a whole new set of barriers for some of us, and we may not be well prepared for them. Which leads us on to the final question of why does anyone actually want an autism diagnosis in the first place? There's literally no social, financial, or material motive towards obtaining an autism diagnosis, so why are people queuing up to get them? There's an overwhelmingly common thread through everyone's answers on that one. Certainty. Nothing more than that. They've already ticked all the boxes they need for their own peace of mind. They've spent years sometimes researching and absorbing, checking, double-checking, going back to the beginning again and categorising everything, seeking not to confirm, but to prove themselves wrong. Once they've erased all but the deepest and most fundamental of self-doubts, there's nothing more they can do. But they still want that certainty, that validation that they're not going round the twist, they're not suffering from some as yet unidentified condition that will end up being named after them. They're just autistic. Something millions of people around the world can already also say. The diagnosis is validation and confirmation. It's not a millstone round their necks, it's a burden of uncertainty lifted. And that's why, when someone announces they've received a diagnosis on social media these days, their autistic friends celebrate with them. It's not because we've recruited more meat for the autistic army. It's because they have lightened their load. People don't seek out an autism diagnosis to be different. Most of them have had enough of that. Most autistic people have had to work hard to not be noticed, but that diagnosis helps them to feel ordinary again. Because when they're amongst autistic folks, that's all they are. Ordinary, normal, unremarkable. Just another face in the crowd. Yes, they'll always stand out amongst non-autistic peers, but now they absolutely know why that is, and they've got a piece of paper to prove it. Because sometimes you need that piece of paper, even when the rules say you really shouldn't. The needs of a diagnosed autist are no different from those of an undiagnosed autist. But good luck finding an employer, a school, or even a courtroom who are willing to make accommodations for you without one, because they're a rare find. Even where such refusal is against the law, undiagnosed autists still have a harder time getting even the most unobtrusive accommodations considered, let alone implemented. But asking for a diagnostic assessment and getting one can be two different things. The reasons behind it are many, and I'll talk about them later in the series, but for now I have to ask you to indulge me and take my word for it. Even getting a referral for an autism diagnosis as an adult can be a mountain to climb in its own right. It doesn't matter what country you live in, how the healthcare system is structured, how well known autism may be where you are. Huge numbers of adults seeking autism diagnosis have had to fight like tigers just to get a GP referral for a pre-assessment chat, let alone getting on the formal diagnostic path. A surprising number of qualified professionals still maintain that it's impossible to diagnose autism in adults, and even those who know better may still counsel against diagnosis because of the stigma attached. Then there are the waiting lists. I've been contacted by several adults in recent weeks who've been awaiting their assessment for 5 years or more, and stories like theirs are ever more common. Again, I'm not just talking about in the UK either. Some of the obstacles faced in private or insurance-based health systems are equally as bizarre as they can appear insurmountable. I talked in the last film in this series of how the internet, and in particular social media, have played a huge part in increasing the public visibility of autism and the traits associated with it. Adding actual autistic voices to the mix has made that knowledge more palatable and more relatable to the general audience, and inevitably, bells have rung in people's minds, though maybe in a few more than some might have expected. And it's all happening very quickly. There's been a massive uptick in understanding and discussion about autism, ADHD, and neurodivergence in general. The term neurodiversity isn't a novelty anymore, and yet the capacity for diagnosis and for accommodation really hasn't caught up. Service providers, governments, employers, and the general public still have a lot of catching up to do. It's not a trend, but it's easy to see how it can be mistaken for one. In the space of a few short years, a huge demand for autism assessment has sprung up, seemingly out of nowhere, but there just isn't the diagnostic capacity in place. Supply cannot meet demand. When there's backlogs of more than 5 years, is it any surprise that people started to just come out and ask for support before they've been rubber-stamped as an official state-sanctioned autistic? Many were already unhappy. Some of us suffering unfathomable pain when we started down this road to discovery. So what kind of inhuman monsters would we be to turn such people away from what little comfort we may offer just because they haven't reached their destination yet? Sorry, madam, I know your husband is bleeding profusely, but I really don't see why I should be expected to stitch him up until I see a piece of paper explaining why he's bleeding. It doesn't matter to me that someone has their autistic golden ticket when I talk to them. What matters to me is whether I relate to them or not, and if what I have to offer is relevant to them. Are we here to spread a little knowledge and kindness, or are we here to gatekeep against invaders? I've met plenty of folks who started down this road but soon after realised it wasn't who they were, and they moved on, a little richer in knowledge but without the answers they sought. Some of them have found pointers that took them where they needed to be, though. Thinking you might be autistic and being certain are two different things. Some folks are sure they're autistic and don't feel the need for diagnosis at all, though it's not that common. And others can't get diagnosed without losing something dear to them or even their livelihoods. Most people I've met in the self-identified camp actually want the absolute certainty and validation that comes with diagnosis, and in many cases need it to prove their legitimacy to people with power over them. Both are valid, though. The value is in our words and actions, not in our diagnostic status. But getting a diagnosis isn't a straightforward or streamlined process, and I personally would rather see people joining autistic communities and receiving support when they need it, rather than suffering for years in silence. So, how do we solve this problem of self-diagnosed people then? Well, it would help if we can agree on whose problem it is first. Because from my point of view, the people worst affected by it, actually in most cases the only people suffering any kind of inconvenience themselves, are the self-diagnosed autists. They're the ones with the self-doubts that keep them in the shadows or make them afraid to request basic accommodations. Many accommodations for autistic needs cost nothing, so someone being asked to provide one is no better or worse a position with or without a diagnosis in play. Unless we're saying we're only capable of kindness when we're legally obliged. Instead of forcing people to suffer until they get their golden ticket, why not make the little concessions they're asking for, just because you want to be nice? Now the genie's out of the bottle, there'll never be a time when there's such a backlog again, once this one's been worked through. That doesn't help those waiting for and wanting a diagnosis, but if we're not denying people accommodations, if we stop willingly inflicting pain on people for thinking, sensing, or feeling differently to us, maybe the wait will be a bit more bearable. There will always be a few people who slip through the cracks, but it's unlikely there will ever be another diagnostic bottleneck like this again, where so many people realise in such a short time that they're neurodivergent and need confirmation. Maybe we'll even change the way we look at autism and diagnosis won't be an issue anymore. Either way, in 10 or 15 years' time, this video won't seem anywhere near as relevant as it does today. At least, I hope it won't. I'm Quinn, and I'm autistic. Thank you for watching. If you've already liked and subscribed and would like to support the channel more, then please follow the Patreon links in the description to pledge what you feel is fair and affordable to help keep the lights on here and the content keep flowing.
I'm HAPPY.